Welcome to Drive the Daf, clear, structured explanation of the daily daf in 20 minutes. You can even follow in the car.
Sukkah Daf Yud. We begin a few lines into the daf. The daf contains one Mishnah. From the beginning of the daf until the Mishnah is discussing a sukkah under another sukkah, the Gemara wants to know how big the top sukkah has to be in order to passel the bottom sukkah. Then the Mishnah teaches us the halacha of sheets that are spread above or below the schach, when those sheets are passel, when they are kosher, whether they are there for protection or for design or other types of sukkah decorations, if they're kosher or not, depending on how they are strung up. The Gemara will also include in this discussion somebody who sleeps under the bed or under a canopy of his bed and how that affects the halacha. So first of all, the Gemara wants to know, we know that there is a pasuk in the Torah which teaches us that a sukkah under another sukkah is pasel, even though the top sukkah is kosher schach. Since the bottom sukkah is underneath an existing sukkah, it's pasel. So Gemara says, how big does that top sukkah have to be in order to passel the bottom sukkah? So the Gemara brings three opinions of Amoraim. The first opinion is Rav Huna, who says that it has to be just one tefach high, because the tefach is significant space, as we find in Hilchos Tumah. The halacha of Tumah is that if Tumah is in a room, is in an enclosure, is in a vacuum of some sort, which has a height of one tefach, that counts, has two halachic significances. First of all, it's enough to count as a roof that it could spread a tumah to everything that's under that roof. So, for example, if you have a board and there's tumah under it on one end and a kli under it on the other end, as long as the board is more than a tefach off the floor, it passes tumah through the rule of tumas oel from the tumah to the other object which is under the board. Another halacha that's relevant to is tumah rising straight upwards. The halacha is that if tumah is in a space that has more than a tefach height, the tumah stays within the space. It's protected there. However, if the tumah is squashed, it's called the tumah ritzutza, it's in a space which is less than a tefach high, then it breaks out and goes straight up, and sometime anything that's above even the roof of the chamber that it's within. So anyway, you see that the minimum size of a chamber is one tefach height. So the same thing should apply over here. That is Rav Huna's approach. The Gemara says Rav Chizda and Rabbi Bar Rav Huna disagree. They say no, it has to be at least 4 tvachim high, because every makom chashuv, every significant space, always has to be 4 tvachim by 4 tvachim. Rashi references us to the beginning of Masechah Shabbos, where we had seen that for something to be considered transferred from Rishos to Rishos, it has to land. If it's thrown, it has to land in something which is chashuv, which is at least a space of 4 by 4. Now Shmuel disagrees. Shmuel says you have to have a height from the bottom sukkah to the top sukkah of at least 10 tvachim. And what's the reason? It has to be a kosher sukkah. Sukkah under a sukkah, we said, so the top sukkah has to be a kosher sukkah. Minimum height of a kosher sukkah is 10 tvachim. So it's got to be at least 10 tvachim high. So now the Gemara has a kasha on Shmuel from the Mishnah. Last Mishnah we had seen discussed the sukkah under a sukkah, which is possible. It said that there's a machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim about a sukkah that ein le diyurin. It has no residence. It has no dwellers. Rabbi Yehuda had said that if it has no residence, if the top sukkah has no residence and the bottom sukkah is kosher, and the Chachamim said the bottom sukkah is possible anyway. So what do you mean it has no residence? It has nothing to do with residence. The Torah told us that a sukkah under sukkah is possible. It didn't say anything about people. So it can't be referring to people. So it has to be referring to that it's a sukkah which is adequate to house people. It must be talking about the minimum height. And you see that Rabbi Yehuda said it has to be at least big enough that people could live in there. But the Chachamim disagreed, and the Chachamim say it doesn't have to be big enough to people to live in there. That means it doesn't have to be at least 10 tvachim high. Kasha and Shmuel says it has to be 10 tvachim high. So Gemara says no. When we said it has to be suitable for people, we're not talking about height. We're talking about the strength of the floor. It has to be suitable to at least hold up people's pillows and blankets. So that way it could at least look like a dwelling place. That's where there's a machlokes between the Tanna Kama and Rabbi Yehuda. So Gemara says it's still kasha on Shmuel. Because Shmuel got his rule of 10 tvachim from this kosher size of a sukkah. Kosher size of a sukkah is based on it being useful, on people being able to live there. The machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and the Tanna Kama is also about being able to be useful for people to live there. That's focusing on pillows and blankets, fine. But they would still say the same thing. They would still also argue about the minimum height, because the entire discussion is built around what is useful for people to live there, what is a functional living space. So they would also argue about height, and Shmuel would be against the Chachamim, who would say that it does not have to be a functional height, just like it doesn't have to be a functional strength of floor. So Gemara says no. They all agree that it has to be a functional strength of a floor. The machlokes is where the floor doesn't really hold people very much. It's what's called it could just barely hold up anything. And the machlokes between Rav Yehuda and the Tanna Kama is how strong does it have to be precisely? What's considered strong enough? But they all agreed to the standard that it does have to be a real functional living space. And the Tanna Kama and Rav Yehuda both agreed, therefore, that the minimum height would have to be 10 tvachim. That's how Shmuel would understand it. Okay, that concludes this Gemara. Now we get to our next mission, and this mission discusses where you spread cloths under your schach, over your schach, or over yourself. So the Mishnah discusses two types of cloth you would spread. One would be above or below the schach, and the other one would be above or below the bed that you're sleeping on. So as far as the schach, it says as follows. It says if you spread a sheet for protection, that's puzzle. Protection might be protection from the sun, and you can spread it on top of the schach or under the schach, or might be spread under the schach to catch leaves falling from the schach. Either way, if it's spread for protection, that means you're setting it up to be schach. Schach is meant to be protecting you, so this is meant to be set up like schach to protect you, and it's not kosher schach. It's a sheet that's made from non-kosher schach material. It's made from different types of cloth, whatever it is. So therefore, it is puzzle. Now, second half of the Mishnah discusses a canopy over your bed. And it talks about two types of canopies. One is which is held up by 4 posts at the 4 corners of your bed. That, the Mishnah says, is puzzle. However, there's one that's held up by 2 posts, one in the middle of the headboard and one in the middle of the footboard. That is kosher. And the reason is that it slopes on the sides like a tent, and there is no flat space of a tefach wide. Therefore, it doesn't count as an ohel, doesn't count as a structure, doesn't count as a roof. And therefore, it's not enough of a structure to puzzle you, and therefore you're allowed to have it over your bed. It's not a psul for you. So there the Gemara begins. The Gemara says this, that we discussed spreading a sheet under over the schach. We only talked about that it's a psul if it's spread there for protection. If it's spread there for design, you have a fancy embroidered, pictured, painted, whatever it is, sheet, that's not a psul. So the Gemara says, yeah, of course, that's 100% right, and it's not a chiddush, because the Mishnah only said that it's puzzle if it's there to protect him from the sun or to catch the leaves. So why does he need to tell me this halacha? So the Gemara says, no, I could have understood that the Mishnah says that it's puzzle even if it's spread there as a design for decoration. The only reason the Mishnah talked about the case of protection is because that's the usual case. So it talks about the most common case. So now the Gemara says, let's try to bring a raya to this halacha of Rav Chizda that the sheet that's spread there for the decoration is not a psul. The raya would be from the following Mishnah. It says if somebody makes a kosher schach and then he decorates it with a painted sheet, a stained sheet, an embroidered cloth, all types of designs embroidered into it, or he hangs on it nuts, almonds, peaches, pomegranates, grape clusters, heads of wheat stalks, wine, oil, flour. All these things are classic things which are used for noi sukkah, for decoration for the sukkah. So the halach is not to use any of these noi sukkah. The noi sukkah is muktzah, it's set aside as a mitzvah until after the last day of Yom Tov is over. Now, if he made it tonight, however, that he does plan to use it, he's not letting it become muktzah, he's not letting it become set aside for the noi sukkah mitzvah, then he is allowed to use it. Anyway, but what we see from this mission is that you're allowed to spread a sheet, and that it's not a psul. This is not necessarily proof to Rav Chizda. Here, this sheet could be spread on the walls, could be spread on the side. That's not a proof that if it's spread completely under the schach, that it's kosher anyway. The Gemara quotes a statement. Rav Ashi says that if you have a sheet hanging in the sukkah, it does not lower the level of the schach. If the schach is too high, more than 20 amas high, the fact that you have a sheet hanging under it which is bottled to the schach does not make it consider the schach to be lower. It can't be, because it's not kosher schach. You're not viewing it as schach itself. If you viewed it as schach, then it would be puzzle altogether. So it does not lower the level of the schach. However, it does, if it's hanging sideways on the walls, if it's hanging vertically, it does minimize the width and length of the sukkah. Meaning if it cuts the sukkah to less than 7 tachim by 7 tachim, that is a psul, because the reason for that size is you should be able to fit yourself, your head, your body, the majority of the body, and your table into the sukkah, and you don't have that amount. It cuts off that space. Gemara brings in now an incident with Rashi that his servant, whose name was Minimin, had a shirt that got soaked. He spread it on top of the schach to dry. And Rashi said, to take it off, people are going to think that that's a kosher schach, and it's not. They'll learn a halacha from here that you're allowed to use something that's mekabel tumah, something which is a kli, as schach. So Gemara says, well, what do you mean? He answered Rav Ashi, he said, everybody could see that it's wet. It's obviously clear there's just spread it to dry. He said, yeah, I meant to say when it's dry, take it off right away. Don't leave it there so that people shouldn't get the wrong idea. Okay, now the Gemara discusses the halacha of noi sukkah, the sukkah decorations more deeply. Gemara discusses what happens if the sukkah decorations are hanging more than 4 tvachim from the schach. So Gemara says, Machlokas Rav Nachman who says that it's kosher, against Rav Chizda and Rabbi bar Rav Huna who said that it's possible. Gemara says it was a time that Rav Chizda and Rabbi bar Rav Huna went to visit the Reish Galusa in his house on Sukkot, which was a custom. It was considered a minhag and an obligation. It was even a mitzvah. And Rav Nachman was an officer in the house of the Reish Galusa, and he showed them to a space to sleep in the sukkah. And the place that he showed them had sukkah decorations that were more than 4 tvachim from the schach, which they held was puzzle. But they're quiet. They didn't protest that it's a puzzle sukkah. They went to sleep, no problem. So he said, so I see that you changed your mind about your psak. He said, no, we're actually pater from sukkah altogether. Because we're shluchei mitzvah, we came here to do a mitzvah. We're pater from the mitzvah of sukkah, and it's not an issue at all. Okay, now the Gemara goes to the discussion of cloths hanging over your place that you sleep, hanging over the bed. So Gemara says the statement of Rabbi Yehuda Mishmuel says if you have a canopy hanging over your bed, he calls it a kila. That's one that's held up on 4 corners by 4 posts. So Rabbi Yehuda says in the name of Shmuel, it depends how high it is above the bed. If it's within 10 tvachim of the bed, it's kosher. If it's more than 10 tvachim above the bed, then it's puzzle, because that counts as an ohel. If there's a tefach space under it, it counts as a structure, it counts as an ohel, and therefore you're not in the sukkah, you're in the ohel, you're in the tent created by this canopy over the bed that you have. So there's a few kashas on this from the Brises. One says somebody sleeps under a kila and a sukkah is not yaitza, and does not differentiate in height. And says, okay, so that's talking about where it was more than 10 tvachim high. Next one, is a Mishnah says somebody who sleeps under a bed in the sukkah is puzzle. He's not yaitza. So Gemara says, you're right. You wouldn't say the sukkah is puzzle. You would say he's not yaitza. So Gemara says, also not a problem. It's talking about where the bed was more than 10 tvachim above the floor, and therefore it's the same concept. Now, Gemara's kash from our Mishnah. Our Mishnah said if you spread a canopy on 4 posts, it's puzzle. So Gemara first wants to say it's talking about where it's more than 10 tvachim high. Gemara says you can't say that because there's a brayso that explains the Mishnah. The Mishnah said that if it's a 4-post canopy, it's puzzle. If it's a 2-post canopy where it slopes on the sides, that's kosher. So the brayso explaining it said that 2-post canopy, which is kosher, is only if it's within 10 tvachim. If it's more than 10 tvachim, it's puzzle. So obviously, when we say that the 4-post canopy is puzzle, it doesn't matter what the height is, and that's clearly against Rabbi Yehuda or Mishmuel, who says that there is a difference in height between the 4-post canopies. Gemara says this is different. This is talking about where it's a set canopy, a fixed creation. It's on kinuyfois, it's part of the bed, therefore it's set and fixed. Something which is set and fixed, even Rabbi Yehuda or Mishmuel would agree, no matter what the height is, that is puzzle. He was only talking about where you temporarily hung a sheet. So Gemara says, I have a kasha on that. And that's going back to the concept of a sukkah on top of a sukkah. Sukkah on top of a sukkah is definitely fixed. It's created there and it's very sturdy and strong. And on that, Shmuel said that the halacha is that it's only a psal if the top sukkah is a minimum of 10 tvachim high. So you clearly see that the height differentiation applies even in something that's fixed. So here too, in your case, don't tell me that because it's fixed, that's why there's no difference in what the height is, and that even if it's less than 10 tvachim high, it will be puzzle. Not true. According to what you're saying, that the height differentiation makes a difference in halacha, same thing should apply even if it's fixed, because the sukkah on top of a sukkah works even if it's fixed. So the Gemara says, no. The psul of a sukkah on top of a sukkah is very different than the psul of a cloth hang over a bed as a canopy. Sukkah on top of a sukkah, the reason why it's possible is because you have a kosher sukkah on top of you, and the Torah says there's a psul if you have a sukkah on top of a sukkah. In order for that to be, it has to be a kosher sukkah. Less than 10 tvachim high is a puzzle sukkah, and therefore it's not a psul. It doesn't qualify for the pasuk's psul of a sukkah on top of a sukkah. Here we're talking about where you're creating an ohel. Creating an ohel, there's 2 ways to create an ohel. One is if it's 10 tvachim high, and the other is if it's permanently fixed. So permanently fixed would be a psul even if it's less than 10 tvachim high, and that's why there is a differentiation in the height in the case of the cloth, but that's why being fixed makes it that it makes no difference what the height is, while in the second type of a sukkah, it does make a difference what the height is, even if it is fixed. Fixed has nothing to do with establishing a kosher sukkah, which is what that psul is based upon. Okay, another word brings a related halacha, somebody who's sleeping in a bed with a canopy, and he's undressed, he's not wearing anything, and he wants to say Kriya Shema. So, Shmuel says, it's Rav Chalifa bar Avimi in the name of Shmuel, says that he can just stick his head out of the canopy, and then he's kosher. Now, he's allowed to say Shema. Now, the issue over here is not Libei Rois Eva. It's not that he's undressed, and there's no blockage between his heart and his erva, his part of the body, which is usually covered. That's not the problem here. Shmuel doesn't hold of that. The problem is you're not allowed to say Shema in the room with an exposed erva. So here, his own erva is exposed. So by sticking his head out, his head is considered to be in a different room. Now, we do not say that he's just sticking his head out the window, and therefore his head is considered to be part of the same room. You just, even if your head is sticking out of a room, you just view your head halachically as if it's within the room. You don't say that. You say that it's out of the room. So Gemara says that there's a different brisa that says clearly that that does not work. So you have there's a brisa that says clearly that does not work. So you have a conflict here between what Shmuel says and what the brisa says, whether sticking your head out of the kilo works or not. So Gemara says again the difference will be if it's 10 tvachim high or not. If it is 10 tvachim high, then it's considered to be a room. It doesn't help to stick your head out the window, because your head is naturally considered to be within the room that your body's within. However, if it's less than 10 tvachim high, it's like your shirt. Your head is sticking out of your shirt. Doesn't mean we don't halachically view your head as if it's inside your shirt, and therefore it's considered to be separate. It's not considered to be inside, and you're allowed to say Shema. It's not in the same environment as the erva. The Gemara says it's also logical that this is the explanation of this Mishnah, because if you look at the end of the Mishnah, it says that the reason that this is okay because it's like somebody who stands in a house if he's undressed and he sticks his head outside the window. He's not allowed to say Shema that way because that is considered to be a house, and his head is sticking outside the window is considered to be inside the house. Therefore, that's logical to show that this case, the reason it's not a problem is because it is less than a 10 and it's not considered like he's in a house. The Gemara just points out that the halacha of 10 will not help you for a house. If you have a house which is its ceiling is less than 10 tefachim, you can't say, "Oh, I'm wearing the ceiling." A house is a set, fixed structure, and therefore your head sticking out the window is considered to be inside the house, even if it's less than 10 tefachim.
Drive the Daf is a project of the Grand Woodlands Shul and is presented by Rabbi Yitzchak Landa. Find us on YouTube or subscribe to daily emails by emailing drivethedaf@gmail.com.